foundational knowledge in biology that there's a corpus callosum that connects like the two sides of the brain, right? And then that has different parts. So you've got your cerebellar hemisphere, your cerebellum, you've got the different parts of your midbrain here, right? Or like mid to hindbrain, and then you have your corpus callosum. And it kind of, it's like all folded back in there. I don't know what's going on. Oh, it's just kind of cut weird. Okay, let's use this one. Okay, so for this guy, I'm just gonna start, because there's so many like detailed names, I'll start from like one area and go over it. Okay, so for this corpus callosum, the front corner of it here is the genu, right? That's on the lower figure here. The back part is the fornix. This long skinny connection is the trunk. And then this part down here, what is that called?
That's the fornix. Wait, you said the top part is the fornix?
Oh, sorry, this part is the splenium. Sorry, the front part is the genu, the back part is the splenium. So we've got genu and splenium, and then the long part connecting is the trunk. And then the part that kind of wraps around more ventrally by the genu is the fornix, okay? Then this space here between the trunk and the fornix is the lateral ventricle, and it's got kind of a sheet that runs like right down the middle. So in some specimens you'll be able to see this sheet, and that's the septum pellucidum. Right, did I say that? Yeah, septum pellucidum. Good? All right, so I've got this whole corpus callosum, the splenium back here, the genu up here, the trunk, the lateral ventricle space, septum pellucidum, and the fornix down here. Okay, so that gives you some reference there. All right, so then we're going to go back here. Some other important structures. So just behind this corpus callosum, you have this big round intermediate mass. Okay, and then this part is the pineal gland here. So remember back to when we did the lamprey and there's that like third eye, it's kind of like a white spot between the eyes on the top of the head. That was the pineal gland, right? So in more invertebrates that retain like more of the ancestral type morphology, the pineal gland is like on the surface and involved in like photoreception and like circadian rhythms and things. Pineal gland still is somewhat involved in that, but it's deeper in the brain in later more derived vertebrates. And this pineal gland is also part of the endocrine system. It's part of hormone regulation as well, okay? So it's part of the nervous and endocrine systems. So you got your pineal gland here, and then this is your anterior colliculus, this big hump here, and then there's a little hump behind it called the posterior colliculus, okay? And then you have your cerebellum here, and you can see this really cool tree-like branching structure within the cerebellum. That's called the arbor vitae, which just translates into tree of life. So it's kind of cool structure. All right, and then just looking from the side view, we have the same stuff that we saw in the ventral view. So of course you've got your spinal cord in this section, your medulla oblongata here, your pons here, and then your cerebral peduncle here. Okay, makes sense? So cerebral peduncle, pons, medulla oblongata, and spinal cord. Now, it also labels like your optic chiasma here and your mammillary bodies in the side view, right? But I mean, those could be labeled in the medial view on the exam, but I'm more likely on a medial view like this to really ask you the structures that you can only see in the medial view. You know, I feel like you can get a better view of the mammillary bodies if you're, you know, in the ventral view. In the optic chiasma, you can see better in the ventral view. Same for, you know, the cerebral peduncle, the pons, medulla oblongata. So, you know, it's helpful to know where those are, but I'm going to label those in the ventral view where you can see the entire structure, okay? But just for reference so you know where we're at. Okay, so those are, you know, kind of the main larger structures. So then I want to go through here and make sure that I get all the little cracks and crevices and like small bumps that are also named, okay? So, all right, so we've got our septum pellucidum, we did our intermediate mass here, pineal gland, anterior colliculus, posterior colliculus, lamina quadrimina, that's one that we didn't go over. That's between the pineal gland, let's see, oh yeah, it's just below the anterior colliculus. Okay, so here's our anterior colliculus, here's our pineal gland, and this is the lamina quadrimina. You can see it's a little bit different color, it's kind of below the anterior colliculus here. So anterior colliculus, posterior colliculus, and our lamina quadrimina right here. Okay. So that's kind of wedged between the cerebral peduncle and the anterior colliculus, the lamina quadrimina. Okay. The cerebral aqueduct is just below that. So that's this part right here. So this kind of groove between the lamina quadrimina and the cerebral peduncle is called the cerebral aqueduct. Okay. Fourth ventricle is just between the posterior colliculus and the cerebellum here. So our fourth ventricle is just this little space here. Okay. What else? Oh no, sorry, I got cross-eyed. Fourth ventricle is back here. This is a fourth ventricle back here, above the spinal cord and medulla oblongata and below the cerebellum. So this is the fourth ventricle. Sorry. Okay.
Does the other space have a name?
It does. I thought.
So the posterior. No,
That one. The posterior colliculus is the bump.
Oh.
Maybe it doesn't have a name. It's not labeled in either of these two figures. Or this one. No. Okay. So this is the fourth ventricle here. Oh, sorry, I was using this one. Fourth ventricle here. Cerebral aqueduct is here below the lamina quadrimina. We've got the lateral, lateral ventricle, right? That's covered by the septum pellucidum so far. So those are openings so far that we've gone over. Medulla, pons, cerebral peduncle. We've got all that. The habenular trigon. That one's still like a bump. That's like a bump that's between the pineal gland and the intermediate mass. So it's kind of difficult, but it's this little part here. So like you've got the main intermediate mass here, the pineal gland here, and this little habenular trigon is right here. Okay, the space in front of the intermediate mass here is called the foramen of Monroe. Okay, so this space, this was a pretty large space, is the foramen of Monroe, right? And you've got your lateral ventricle here. So really, those are probably your two largest spaces, foramen of Monroe and the lateral ventricle. The third ventricle is fairly minor, and the anterior commissure, they're kind of similar to where the foramen of Monroe is. So this big opening is foramen of Monroe, and your third ventricle and anterior commissure are really more like grooves. The other one that we were going, in yours they looked more separate. This one doesn't really, not very clearly distinguished. It might be because of where it was cut. The anterior commissure is basically just like a continuation of the foramen of Monroe. Oh, maybe so. But just for now, so the foramen of Monroe, you can see kind of curves around the intermediate mass, but you can see it kind of continues as a groove. That groove is the anterior commissure, okay, whereas the actual opening is the foramen of Monroe. So this is anterior commissure, but the third ventricle, yeah, is like, you know, under, like there's kind of like two grooves. And it's not really clear in that one because you have to be like right in the middle with your cut. There's kind of a groove there. Yeah.
The lower one, though?
Yeah, it's the lower one that's like between the anterior commissure and, let's see, what would that be? The mammillary bodies. Right, so like this is the mammillary bodies. This would be like your third ventricle, and this is your anterior commissure. Okay, so you can see that some of these get like really, really minor, right? Like those things, whereas like some of those others are like large structures that like I really want you to know. Of the minor structures like that, of the like the really challenging ones that are in this section, this medial section of the brain, you know, I'm not going to ask you more than a couple of those questions. I'm going to try and concentrate on like the other things that are more conspicuous structures, you know, to identify. Okay, so don't get too bogged down in like the really challenging parts of the brain. Okay, let's see if there's anything else. Mammillary body. We did all that. Did all that. Okay, so we covered everything.